Well, it's time to react to an Asmongold video. It's about time, right? This is where he interviews Hazzikostas. So that's the the game director of World of Warcraft, and going to be discussing the direction that Dragonflight is going to be taking. So let's have a little listen. I'm excited.
Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, all right. Well, I have to say,
There
I
it
am
is.
kind of amazed that this is finally happening over 4 years or so.
Wait,
So,
let me
yeah, I
just do
wanted to
this.
say thanks a lot for coming on. I really
It's all
appreciate it,
right.
man.
No
No,
problem,
absolutely.
Asmon.
It's a
You're
pleasure.
fine.
Been a
That's
while
fine.
since
It's all
bumping
right.
into you,
Don't
like
worry
coming
about
off stage at BlizzCon years back.
Yeah, 4 years ago, I saw somebody post a picture, and it was quite a shock to see how much hair I had back then. Really was.
You and me both.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to ask is now that Shadowlands is primarily over, what would you really say are the biggest successes of Shadowlands? What do you think that we can expect to see going forward?
Definitely Covenants. I think
Okay.
Covenants. We want to make sure like that's
Really?
actually. I think we want to fit those into Dragonflight and
Yeah.
um. So high level, I think narratively, one of the big challenges and exciting things about Shadowlands was making
Not sure I
something
agree with that.
brand new in World of Warcraft. Like we've over the years mined out a lot of the lore, a lot of the original settings from Warcraft 3 and onwards.
There's that Warcraft 3. You remember that the end of Shadowlands is basically everything that's been building up since Warcraft 3, according to that lore dude, the Dang guy. Uh, as if Warcraft 3 ever had anything in mind in regards to the jailer. It was very obvious that Warcraft 3's story was Warcraft 3's story, not this whole World of Warcraft retconning as if like it was all the jailer's intention that Arthas does what he does. Arthas has no idea who the jailer is. Not truly. We know that, you know that, I know that, everyone knows that. Blizzard just want to retcon everything, which is kind of a shame because it kind of kills all the original stuff. But I don't still play World of Warcraft, but I'll come back for the Wrath of the Lich King, and I might check out Dragonflight because they've kind of. It really depends what game systems they put into Dragonflight, because at the moment it's just the talents. But if they take away the power, the borrowed power, that might make the gameplay actually good. But it depends what the content is as well.
And every time comes time to make a new expansion, one of the big questions is like, okay, where's left for us to visit? And I think the challenge of say what you will about Sylvanas, the jailer, the rest. I think building environments and building characters and cultures in the enchanted forest of Ardenweald and the Gothic castles and cities of Revendreth and so forth, and having that feel like an extension of World of Warcraft and having players really vibe with those environments and call them home. I think that was super satisfying for all of us. Um, Obviously, I think along the way, a lot of the realizations we came to in driven by community feedback over the course of the middle of Shadowlands 9.15 and onward, I think are something that will change WoW for the better forever going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I remember watching the Taliesin interview tomorrow, or tomorrow, yesterday, excuse me. And you were saying how pretty much all of the stuff is going to be account wide now for Dragonflight.
See, I think there is still hope for Dragonflight. I'm not going to be one of these people that's like, oh, Blizzard are going to totally fix it or anything. But I feel like they really got hammered hard towards the end of Shadowlands. Really, obviously, because they're losing so many subscribers. So they actually had to act rather than just sort of casually be like, we still got subscribers. Who cares? I think like they have to do things. So they are starting to make much more in terms of quality of life, like Asmon says about the account-wide stuff. You're going to see more of that, I hope. Not just because of basically the bad feedback they got, obviously, during Shadowlands and making it harder for people to make ults and stuff, but other games have done it successfully. Like Final Fantasy has had a massive resurgence, as well as just being in the spotlight for pretty obvious reasons. That the game is designed to be played how you want to play it, and then you just stop playing it if you want, or come back later. There's no sort of forced feel of keeping you in, which Blizzard absolutely have done and will do. And, maybe they'll tone it down a bit. I don't think they're going to get rid of it, though, because that was one of the things that really annoyed me about the Burning Crusade. I won't go on too long. I'll only do a little bit. Is that the Burning Crusade, they dragged it out, that patch where they introduced Kael'thas and Lady Vash. and Kael'thas. Pracky quit just before that came out, and then I basically just quit because it wasn't so fun to play without Pracky, obviously. So just before that patch came out, we kind of gave up because we had already been raiding Karazhan and all that for so long. They actually delayed it, that it was later than the actual original game, because they want to just make sure people stay in the game for long enough, even though they know people can beat it quicker.
Or a lot of the in-game systems.
I'm sure that will be weaponized against me and us. And it's like, hey, Ian, you promised everything.
Yeah.
It's like, philosophically, yeah, it's get your gear, get your power. That's a character progression. That's part of the journey when you're making a new character. But yeah, access to content, utility, cosmetics, almost all the rest. And we also want to ask the question of like, how fun is the content that you're going to have to do to replay multiple times?
Good question.
Exactly. And the less it is, the more we want to make that optional. It has to be something you can choose whether or not to do.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I'm very relieved to hear that. I know that was something that a lot of people complained about in BFA and also Shadowlands, so it's a huge relief. The next thing is I wanted to ask about the dragon riding abilities in combat. Do you think that we're going to be able to ride these dragons into combat in a battle like Malagos or something crazy?
I don't think the engine has the support for it.
Maybe at some point. Yeah, I think
Really?
one of the things, like, we don't have anything planned like that right at launch. I think we want to really understand how the system plays and its strengths and weaknesses and what it's good at. And then I think trying to incorporate.
I don't think there's really anything to the dragon flying
future dungeon
stuff.
or raid encounter, or even something in the outdoor world or whatever, feels like a cool
It just
place to
looks a bit
explore.
nice for the
But, like, let's
promo
build a solid
trailer.
foundation first, and then figure out how to build upon it.
Focus on step 1 until we get to step 5.
Yeah,
I think
exactly,
that makes a
Hive.
lot of sense. Yeah. And so outside, dragon riding is obviously something everybody's going to be doing. And of course, we're going to get new raids, we're going to get new dungeons. But is there any other content that, like, just a casual player who just logs on and just wants to enjoy the game at large is going to really have to do on a daily?
Well, I mean, have to do in the mandatory sense? Or
No, like, actually,
exactly, yeah.
a little bit of both. But, just like casual fun stuff too, like the Darkmoon Fair, for example. Are we going to get something similar to that?
I mean, so I think maybe not Darkmoon Fair specifically,
Yeah.
but I think everything, events, world content in general. I think Zereth Mortis is like it's one zone. We're looking to, in a lot of ways, build an entire continent, an entire expansion with those philosophies and that approach. And so things like protoform synthesis that currently exist, just as a fun collection space to explore, is the kind of thing we want to do more of. I think we've in a lot of ways underserved something that may be almost a silent majority in our game, or a quiet majority, which are people who aren't looking to top meters and push keys and get their PvP rating up. They just want to explore, do chill stuff, and feel at home in the world.
Doesn't it seem like they're still underserving now? I know obviously it's still early days, but we really have no idea what this expansion is. Like, seriously, new zones, that's a given because it's an expansion. You need places to level, you need places to do things, so that shouldn't even really be counted as content to some degree, because you have to have it, otherwise there is no expansion in the first place. I'm talking about things like the Torghast, etc., that are actually like mechanical things that you interact with as a player. Whether you like Torghast or not, I think it could be greatly improved Torghast, and then actually made to be genuinely quite fun to play if you do proper challenges and stuff with it and make it more sort of impactful and fast and, get in, get out kind of thing. Addictive, roguelike style, rather than dragged. They're purposely hiding details to generate hype. I mean, I have to assume that you're right there, Paul Master, because I hope that's the case, because otherwise, literally, what do you have? As far as I know, it's literally just talents. But we already have talents. These are going to be, like, better, I suppose, allowing players to sort of more hone what it is that they're trying to do with their character, and they don't have to depend on borrowed power. So I think that's the struggle that Blizzard have, is introducing things that aren't gameplay mechanics for players to interact with as they play the expansion that are borrowed power. Because if you think about it, like, all of this stuff is kind of borrowed power. So by taking borrowed power out, they have to then put things that are kind of fun to do, but aren't necessary to do exactly.
And while still serving, the core raid, dungeon, all the rest, we want to do more for that group in particular in Dragonflight.
That is great. I totally agree. I'm really glad to hear that. And another thing is that, like, we've gotten some new arenas. We've gotten the Maldraxxus arena, the Kyrian arena, but we haven't really gotten a lot of new types of content for, like, a PvPer to do, like battlegrounds. And
if they could revamp random
PvP,
battlegrounds, that'd be fun, wouldn't
obviously
it?
solo shuffle.
I
And
think
apparently
people like
raiders
doing
come into
that.
Are we going to see more battlegrounds?
They just
or
need to
more
make it
war
way
mode
more
features and
less
Dragonflight
punishing
as well?
and more fun to play.
long term, that's something we want to do. I think the focus, as you mentioned, is on a rated version of Solo Shuffle, um, taking making some changes to the way gearing works in PvP to make it more just like a couple of fixed tiers. So the conquest gear is conquest gear. You don't have to worry about upgrading it as you go up in rating, so that the experience of getting into the season or catching up on alts is less painful. And I think with war mode, we often, the best war mode content is the organic stuff. It's not the thing that we set up as like a specific PvP event, but it's something like assaults in 8.1 BFA, where it's like there's just stuff that both factions want to do. There's extra bonuses for having war mode on. There's natural collision that occurs, and that makes for some fun world PvP. On the battleground question, we want to add more battlegrounds. I think there's work we need to do to overhaul our kind of underlying BG system before that makes sense. I think part of what we've seen over the years when we add battlegrounds, we're adding one battleground into a big rotation. Which most people random queue for, you might queue all afternoon and not land in the new battleground at all. And so it's like, is that really changing the experience in the way that we would hope that new content?
I don't know if they've done it yet, but what they could do is some sort of feedback loop for the player base where they give them a poll to actually decide. A bit like in Warcraft 3, like certain maps will become outdated or less interesting to play, and certain maps will be definitely always preferred to be played. So you could kind of like thin some of them out by working out which maps people really just don't care about in terms of random battlegrounds. So you can just get rid of them, and you can alternate new ones in to replace the ones that no one... when you get like a battleground, you're like, oh, this one, I can't be bothered. That's also the case.
That's why I think recently you've seen us pivot to brawls a lot, where we can have at least focus on that specific brawl in a specific week or two. But I think as our general approach of looking at evergreen systems and foundations of our game continues, we have the ones we're focusing on right now for Dragonflight. I think looking at how the BGQ pool works, and maybe there's something we can do there with the seasonal rotation going forward.
Sorry, just again, like one other easy way, like if you just made it so that when players search for battlegrounds, say you're in a group, you search for a random battleground, you have a list of 10 battlegrounds and you can only pick 7. Something like that. That would make it very obvious, generally speaking, because they will have the metrics, they'll have the data, which 3 are at the bottom, percentage-wise, overall, by all the players that play.
Lets us bring in new maps and focus on specific ones. There's a lot of stuff we want to explore in the future, but not for Dragonflight right at launch.
So kind of like the seasonal thing that you're doing with the dungeons in Mythic Plus, kind of?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, yeah, I think that makes sense. And now I have kind of a much bigger question, is that every expansion, we go up like 100 or 150 item levels.
Oh,
like
God.
Characters at the beginning of the expansion are doing 20,000 DPS, at the end they're doing 100, like 5x more.
How does that...
And like we've had so many stat switches right now, we need one like every other expansion. And like with BFA, we needed one just inside of that expansion. Do you guys see that as a problem, or is that going to be pretty much just the norm going forward?
There are aspects of it that are problematic. I think not having that extra multiplicative borrowed power helps keep that power creep in check. Like over the course of Legion, some of your power came from gear. A huge portion of it came from dozens of artifact traits and legendaries and all the rest multiplying across that.
That was great.
But the item level progression, honestly, that's been part of World of Warcraft since, I would say, the middle of Wrath of the Lich King. Mm-hmm. Right around like Ulduar into TOC into Icecrown was the first time in WoW where Blizzard kind of officially said, you don't need to go back and farm old raids anymore. You don't need to keep farming for your DFT all expansion long or whatever. It's just the new tier is a fresh start. And that has a lot of advantages in terms of just accessibility, making it feel like it doesn't matter if you missed a patch, you're not forever behind. You can come back, join your raid guild, play with your friends, jump in, join pubs, whatever, and do the new thing. And that's just kind of how WoW has been for the last 15 years. I think we've experimented a bit with item level gaps between tiers, but what we often find is if an item isn't at least a certain % better than what you got months ago, and you're having to learn an all new encounter or go into an all new challenge to get it, that just doesn't feel good as a reward. If you're, a guild that does normal raids and progresses into heroic over the course of a tier, let's say, but you're going to start in normal of the next tier. If that gear isn't better than what you're wearing, like, what's the point? Where do we even go from there? And so that has dictated certain gaps. And I think the most important thing is that rewards feel rewarding in the short term. And one of the burdens of the years long, decades long life cycle is doing things like squishes. But while we don't love it from an elegance perspective, I think it's better than saying this patch or this raid tier is not going to feel rewarding just so that it buys us more long term room.
And like, how long do you view that like kind of upgrade cycle being? Because we've had a few of these overlaps happen. Like you remember like Ashvane's Razor Coral or like Ashara's Font. Do you see it as a positive or a negative, or like, because what happens nowadays is that it feels like you're not really playing the whole expansion. You're just kind of playing just the patch. It's like during Sanctum of Domination, why would you go back into Castle Nathria? And especially nowadays, why would you go back? And it seems like you're trying to solve that problem a little bit in Season 4 with like these new affixes and things like that. So is that something that we can expect to see going forward into Dragonflight?
Pretty sure Asmon wants to see like more of the content be playable like almost all times. Like if you had it scaling, that'd be interesting. I guess people would always min-max though and do the latest, but if you made it so like a lot of dungeons from the past could still be done, or raids as a group, it would give you slightly worse than the best current gear from the current raiding tier, but at least you'd get to do different content. I don't know, but would people do it because they're not technically getting the best of the best? It's so tricky. I don't know how you solve that. Stay yourself. Thank you, Rabatska.
Stay yourself.
Not initially.
Okay.
I don't think, but the Season 4 experiment, like I think as a capstone to expansions, is something that if this works, I'd love to repeat and love to have a little bit of a remix to help avoid content droughts at the end of expansions, along with, of course, just getting the damn expansion out faster.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think a lot of this is listening to what players prefer. I think a lot of what we've heard is that when there are those one or two outlier items from prior tiers that feel relevant long term, we get negative feedback on that. People who don't really feel like they want to have to go back and farm up Sylvanas daggers or whatever else, particularly if they skip that tier and now you're like, oh, I want to switch to Rogue for Sepulcher. Oh, I have to go find pugs and go back and do this other thing. And also, when it's the idea of making more stuff in that space, people are often happy to move on from a setting that they've spent months in, whether it's raiding with a guild, progressing, or pugging. A new environment is part of what's exciting there. So I think we're open to it, and if there's a couple of outliers, we definitely don't want to stop those items from being exciting. But I'm not sure. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'll certainly look at feedback that comes out after this interview. But I'm not sure people are clamoring to have reasons to go back and do Sanctum every week right now.
I think they are. I think people like to have more flexibility with stuff. I just think it's tough to sort of make it so it's still relevant for players without sort of having more headaches. And Blizzard never want more headaches. They want the least amount of stuff to keep an eye on as it is. So if they start making it so you can go to other places other than the current raiding content to get raiding gear, then they need to keep that balance. Because what if it's super easy because of an exploit? Because the game is old. Like the dungeon or the raid you went to is older, so easier to manipulate with new abilities that characters have developed on their classes since. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think about it. I think it's easier with dungeons because dungeons don't have that much of an impact in the long run. But I love to have like all sorts of options dungeons. Like it's so boring if you only do like the same 4 dungeons over and over. But if you could just do like any other dungeon and it would still be like ramped up, then it feels good. But for raiding, it's trickier because the raiders take it a lot more seriously.
It's weird because like for some people, I think they enjoy it. For others, they don't. I mean, I know that, you can always go back and think of the items from like BC or even Wrath, or especially Classic. It's like people went back and remember they used that Classic trinket in like on Lich King, right? Like that kind of stuff is really cool.
Scarab Brooch. Yeah.
Yes, the Scarab Brooch from Vicitus, exactly. And that stuff is great, but at the same time, it's just not, it can be frustrating for people at the same time. And so it's like where that balance is. But you're, in general, okay with a few items spanning a couple of tiers?
I would say a couple of tiers is probably a lot. I think one tier is fine.
I guess so.
Yeah, something like Sylvanas daggers is fine.
No Arcana Crystal?
Yeah, no, not so much, no.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I mean, now that we're talking about loot, why do you not want to bring back Master Wooder?
I knew he was going to do this one.
So I'm sure everyone is like, why are you even wasting time asking this question? They've answered it 50 times. What if I told you I kind of do want to bring back Master Loot?
Okay.
And the team does. So it's an interesting, something we've been reflecting on a lot in the last like year and a half.
The higher ups won't let him or something.
At, places where we in the community have differed over the years and kind of reevaluating some of our thinking. Loot is a tricky one. I think going back to Legion, we had personal loot and group loot in parallel. And maintaining like two versions of loot, both in terms of how its data is set up, the UI experience, the code.
Before he gets too deep into it, I would just say it's very hard from his perspective because you got to think like the average World of Warcraft player. Like Asmon obviously wants like master loot because he gives him more control to steal the loot, but not just because of that, but because it just allows players to properly like assign loot to go to people that actually deserve it or need it or want it. But there's a lot more casual people, I would think, that go into raids and such and probably prefer having personal loot because in their minds, at least, they'll believe that they'll get more loot in the long run that way. Because we've all been in guilds where, like, you see the same people getting loot every week and you just never get anything. It's just like, why am I bothering? So it's the trickiest thing. You almost need like some sort of cross between personal loot and master loot. Maybe a few items could be like master loot or something. Each boss has like one item that's very specific that you can then allocate. But then the rest is personal. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because what's the point of raiding? It's the same thing. Like, why would you raid if you never get loot? Whereas when people get personal loot, they might not get it on every boss, but when they do get it, they feel like they're never going to get it stolen from them, basically. Because someone's not going to take the loot away from them. So it's very hard to reintroduce master loot.
Was a mess. And that was something we wanted to get out of.
Actually, give a currency you can spend on loot from any boss you killed. I love that. That's the Fowler of Justice, that is. I think, absolutely, you should get more of them. Like, they just give players more option. It's like, oh, you got screwed over on bosses? At least you got these tokens that you can build up, and then you can use those to sort of eventually buy yourself something. That feels so much more rewarding. If you get nothing, like, what was Shadowlands? It was like, what's it called? Anima. You get like 35 anima or something. It's just like, what am I going to do with this?
Bunch of reasons. And I think at the time, we were looking at group loot, saw a bunch of problems with this structure we built. We're like, let's tear it down. Let's lay new foundations. Let's build a new system that's all personal. And over the last few years, we've been iterating on it and refining it and adding rules and exceptions. But there's a lot of problems with it. Clarity around what's tradable is pretty bad. The feeling of, hey, an item just dropped and it's technically an eye level upgrade, but I'm not going to use it and I can't give it to my friends. That feels pretty bad. We certainly haven't, solved degenerate behavior from world first guilds. If anything, it's, gotten worse with all the cross server stuff.
Seems that way.
And buyers.
Yes.
And so we're, taking a hard look.
There's no punishment if it's cross server because no one knows who you are.
We've spent like 6 years building on those new foundations. And so it's not just something where you can flip a switch and say, all right, everything works the way it did. But I think there's a lot to be said for, keeping personal loot in some spaces like Outdoor World, trash and dungeons and raids. Like, I don't think anyone needs, group loot trappings there. But the core experience of like, you kill a raid boss, there's 4 things on the corpse and you figure out what you want to do with those 4 things. That's something we'd like to get back to. I don't have the ability to promise that all the work to make that happen can occur in just the next few months, but in terms of long-term heading, I think that's what we're thinking.
So it's not that the team is necessarily ideologically opposed to this. It's just that there was a lot of tech problems and like the dissonance, and I think it was Taurus whenever this happened, just caused up problems.
It's basically we have our tools, our code, every assumption we've made in how we build loot tables from 2018 onwards has gone in one direction, and now we would need to just turn back around. And I think there's a lot of questions to figure out also. I think we should also bear in mind that going back to group loot means that like you can have a bow drop with no hunters in the raid.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a thing that will happen and feels bad, but that's kind of okay.
Transmog piece.
Yeah, because the thing we can't have happen is a world where loot is still smart, and if you stack a group with like 6 warriors, you're only going to get warrior loot, and it's completely tradable with no restrictions. That just kind of breaks everything. So
but who's going to? Not many people are going to do that too much
forward, but that's something we want to do.
Okay, all right, yeah, I guess
definitely
that
exploitable,
definitely makes sense. I mean, logistically, it seems like it would be very, very easy to stack.
Actually,
a
to
raid
be fair, that would I think even average people might still try to do that because they've got that looking for group tool now that makes it easier to specifically search for people and such specific classes. If they didn't have that, people would just they would just do dungeons and raids as normal and get whatever classes they can get. But these days, you can actually more easily look for specific classes. Yeah. Okay, you would do that.
And I would advocate for that, but that's a little bit too much in my own personal interest. But another thing is that the add-ons nowadays, we see that there's a huge UI redesign that's being done with Dragonflight, and I think that's a good thing. And you see nowadays, like many people, whenever they're joining a guild, having weak auras or having DBM is pretty much required, and it creates like this artificial gap between like casual players and hardcore players. It's kind of like a two-part question, and like number one, like does the team, I mean just straight up, does the team design like these like heroic and like mythic encounters for add-ons, same with like Mythic Plus? And the second part is are we going to see more of these features incorporated into the game?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. It's something we spend a lot of time, especially recently, debating. We design acknowledging the existence of add-ons. I think we have to. Sometimes we're actually designing and implementing mechanics in ways that are going to try to work around add-ons, whether it's like entering the code to disarm the bomb on Mechatork, or the Among Us game on Lords of Dread.
Among Us?
And, fixing stuff to plug loopholes that people found, because we know like, hey, we have this idea that could be really fun gameplay, but if an add-on solves the whole thing for you, then what's the point? We have to acknowledge its existence. Ultimately, we're tuning raid encounters in particular with two goals. One, it should be fun. It's kind of goal number one. Goal number two is it should provide an appropriate progression experience for the difficulty and where it is in the raid. And so, a heroic boss that's like late in the tier, our goal ultimately, we probably want that to take like 10, 15 wipes to beat, maybe a couple nights. Ideally a good progression experience is for a heroic guild, you spend your first night, make good progress, you're getting to the start of phase 3, you come back the next night, you tighten up your execution, you get the kill, feels good. Feels like you earned something, but it's also not super frustrating. If you walk in and you kill the boss in 2 pulls, that's a letdown. We actually, you didn't really get to feel the progression experience that you're looking for. And the reality is, people are using add-ons. And so if we build an encounter that was theoretically, completely doable and targeted at, assuming you don't have add-ons at all and aim for that difficulty target, people are going to use DBM and weak auras and go in and simplify mechanics and have an easier than intended time. So we have to acknowledge it in that world. Do we want you to feel like you have to download third-party programs to succeed in your game?
That's the hardest bit.
None of that feels good.
That's the hardest bit to solve. Again, it's like World of Warcraft's so ingrained and sort of old at this point that it's very hard to sort of just say, okay, we've deleted all add-ons and now we've got a base interface that has everything covered for the most part, so you won't need add-ons. Like everyone will always need add-ons or something. But the thing that makes it hardest for me, I remember like the last couple of expansions, I barely ever came back to World of Warcraft properly over the last couple of expansions, but when I did, it was like, oh, what am I going to have to download? I have to look at like MMO Champion or whatever, go through all the add-ons and think, oh, this one's good, and let's make sure it works. How does it look in the game? I've got to set that up. It's like work to sort of get your character sort of right, just to play.
Over the years, we've tried to incorporate aspects of that functionality in our base. Even, sometimes it's just design, like making telegraphs better, or using the energy bars of bosses, mana bars, other ways of signaling, hey, when this bar fills up, a huge ability is going to happen, so you don't need a timer to let you know to prepare for it. Information is something we want to continue to improve and provide in our game. I think that's a core function of encounter design. The problem that we've seen, and that we don't really know how to solve, frankly, right now, is that over the last few years especially, add-ons have moved out of informational into more and more computational.
It's insane.
And like that, then that's the kind of thing that's like solving the problem for you doesn't feel like a thing that it would be bizarre for our own UI to do. Like, and a random example, we were talking about this actually in the office last week. Wrath Classic's coming out later this year. Eventually, you're going to get to Ice Crown Citadel. Random encounter from Wrath that came to mind was like Blood Queen Lanethel and Ice Crown Citadel. Really simple fight. Couple of mechanics, almost patchwork level, but the one signature mechanic, of course, was, got to turn into a vampire, bite other people so that you don't get mind controlled. Back in the day, I think as a raid leader anyway, I think most people kind of call that out on the fly.
Call out names,
yeah. Like you have some rough sense of like, hey, these are our top DPS, or these are people who are bite the healers last. See what happens, and it's fun. You have frantic call outs, and it could be hard. Sometimes you would wipe just because you had to go from 8 to 16. People got confused. I can guarantee that when Wrath Classic Lanethal comes around, it's going to be get a weak aura.
Yep.
You list the people in your raid from top to bottom.
They'll just tell you straight away who to buy.
Everyone installs the weak aura, and when you become a vampire, all it's going to say is fight this person. No one has to speak. No one has to do anything.
He's so right though. That does kill
that doesn't feel like where we want our raid encounters to land. In some ways, it stops
the feel of being there as a group,
cooperative mechanics and coordination that's fun. And I think like all of this was always possible. People just never did it. Like in add-ons back in the day, like bigwigs and stuff actively tried to avoid even making strategy recommendations. It was purely informational. And so maybe there's like an alternate timeline where if guilds had been doing this stuff 12 years ago, the same way AVR got locked down, or like back in Classic, cast canceling add-ons and decursive got changed, maybe that change would have happened. But now we have like a decade worth of add-ons, including things you use to play your rotation better and all the rest, that are built on that framework.
I feel like you can't necessarily just get rid of add-ons, because there's probably a lot of people that use add-ons. Again, think about the casual player base that use add-ons for like quality of life, not necessarily for raiding specifically, but for quality of life features, to find resources and stuff, or like do the lore. I don't know. You have to pick and choose what needs to be deleted. So you either just hard delete everything and then just piss off a whole ton of people, or you can say something like, as soon as you enter a raid, it just stops add-ons working. I don't know how they would make that happen without having to like reset your Warcraft anyway. So it's like you've entered a raid, now you got to exit Warcraft. But let's say they do. You get like raiding, specifically raiding, like add-ons, that's it. You can't use them in raids. Maybe that's the way to get around it. I don't know how they implement it though.
So it's not clear what the path forward is. I think we would have to like do something like restrict what add-on APIs can access, at least in raids and dungeons. Maybe try to offer more of the like proc tracking, class mechanic stuff in our base UI, and maybe get to a place where we can design encounters from the ground up. Still hard, still meant to take a couple dozen pulls on heroic, or 100 pulls if it's a late mythic end boss. That's not what we're not talking about nerfing stuff. We're making it easier, but we'd have to make those changes in concert. It's a lot to tackle, and I know that for a lot of players, hey, we broke the thing that you rely on that makes the game feel more accessible to you, isn't exactly a good message to swallow either. So no easy answers, but it's something we're thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I remember very clearly back in ICC
they could start the ball rolling with the idea of removing add-ons. Like already with the Dragonflight, weren't they talking about like a new interface? That kind of thing. It's like they can start the ball rolling with giving you more inbuilt add-ons that are managed by Blizzard. They could have potentially done it with this expansion, but it might be a bit too hard to throw all of that in there and just hard cut people off. But if people get used to like a new interface and more used to the idea that maybe on the next expansion, Blizzard are just going to remove add-ons, or at least from raiding and stuff, then people will be able to swallow it a bit more easily.
VR got disabled, and then also, didn't that happen also in Nighthold with like Star Augur and Exorcist too?
Yeah, it was like that. Yeah, that was like different ways of putting
the
3D
lines
stuff, attaching to nameplates, or yeah.
So have you all ever thought about actually just like disabling the combat add-ons? Has there ever been conversations about that, or is it just kind of an idea?
It's an idea that we've had conversations about. The challenge is like, the fundamental piece is, can add-ons tell what buffs and debuffs you have on you and members of your group have on them? If we say no, okay, cool, we just broke like all raid frames, everything that you use to, even just baseline, tracking uptime of your slice and dice or whatever, you just want an add-on that makes that easier to see. We broke all of that. Right. That would be, I think, pretty ruinous for a good chunk of our player base to do suddenly. So I think we want to try to figure out a path forward, but it's not clear.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. And will we be seeing some of those improvements and kind of some of those implementations of some add-on features in the new UI that's going to be coming out in Dragonflight?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something, and I guess we didn't get a chance to really touch on it in the deep dive.
Yeah.
Mm.
Crash Reed, who was what the UI designer speaking in that deep dive, one of the things that he's worked on is kind of it's kind of trying to replicate what a lot of people do with weak auras, which is centralizing information about buff uptime, debuff uptime, cooldown tracking, kind of pulling that information towards the center of your screen. So the default UI experience, we can flag abilities for your class as things that you should be able to track very visibly. We can even show things, externals. Like if you're a tank and someone puts paint suppression on you, paint suppression duration should be right there in the middle of your screen under your character if you opt to have that on next to your shield wall or whatever else, because that's helping you manage your own ability usage. Again, of course, like a pro tank with weak auras is going to customize things that's like just for them, but we want the default out of the box experience to be much, much better. And we know that like it's not realistic to design mechanics.
Yeah, I think they're going to
that
take
ask you
time to build
track
up to
uptime
this.
of a buff when that buff is like a flashing thing in the corner of your screen 12 inches away from where your eyes are focused otherwise. We need to do better. Dragonflight's UI isn't just aesthetic, it's trying to tackle that too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I think that's something that's long overdue, and I know almost everybody uses something that's similar to that too. And I was also wondering, obviously add-ons make it easier, and I don't really ever think that we're going to see a world where none of the raids or dungeons are on PTR or something. But were you all happy with what happened with the with Sepulcher and not having some of those fights on the PTR? Because I do think that data mining and a certain degree of it, like for example, we saw the jailer's corpse before we knew what happened at the end of the raid. It's a little bit of a spoiler, right? So like, do you think that is a negative thing for the game? And do you think that we'll see more content not being on PTR and players actually experiencing it whenever it comes out?
What does Final Fantasy do about that? Does anyone know? Because obviously World of Warcraft is data mined to high hell. Like, people will look months in advance at the stuff you're going to get, which is obviously really annoying. But it's one of those deals where as soon as one person starts doing it, then everyone has to start doing it because people have businesses around it, and then, it just snowballs from there. It's just like, for me, for example, like if I'm going to watch a movie, like, or there's a movie I want to watch, I know I'm going to watch that movie. I don't need to see any trailers, any teasers, any spoilers, any information on it. I'm going to watch that movie. I will find out when I see that movie. But this is kind of like the state we're in at the moment, where there's like 15 teasers and several trailers before the movie comes out. Everyone discusses it multiple times before you've even seen it. Like, it's the same thing for video games, really. That's just like, you get so much information. You just don't want to know. Like, and you don't want others to know, really. You want everyone to sort of enjoy experiencing it for the first time properly.
With how the Sepulchre bosses worked out, they weren't like completely free of bugs, but overall, I think it was a smooth experience for all the guilds that went through it and all difficulties. And the fact that like it was a genuine surprise and people were figuring it out as they went, like all of that was exciting to see. We'd like to do more of that. Data mining in general, I mean, I think when it comes to story, definitely makes for some odd, like piecemeal experiences where this portion of the story is visible, but then like no one knows what the cinematic is. So then all of the focus becomes, the cinematic as opposed to the entire story that's told in context. Yeah, ultimately, we want to strike a balance between being able to get the feedback that's going to be important to make the game better. I think if we didn't have PTR at all, well, people wouldn't have had a chance to tell us after playing with and testing their set bonuses on target dummies or going into the raid that, hey, this feels kind of frustrating, or I don't like the way this interacts with my rotation. And we wouldn't want to lose all of that. That's not like finding bugs. That's just getting ahead.
It's like one of those things you just have to put up with, isn't it, really? It sucks, but you do.
But the flip side is, there's something magical about just a sense of mystery and discovery that's really hard to get. It's impossible to preserve in the modern...
Actually, that's one of those things that makes me a little bit smug, because I was there back in the original days. And even then, they still had a site called Fotbot for World of Warcraft, which would help you look up sort of certain quests and items. Well, not everything was filled in. Generally speaking, you were pretty much on your own, and you were just asking people that you were playing with, what do you need to do in certain circumstances, or how do you do something? Like, I was there back before those days when everything just got completely data mined to high hell, and everyone knew months in advance what everything is. Because you'll never have those days again. Like, that's just literally impossible now. It's literally impossible now. So it's crazy. It's crazy that you can never have that now.
Day and age, like everything's going to be on the internet. There's going to be guides.
It's
and
on
videos
YouTube or whatever. Yeah.
But like, yeah, the more it's out there before the thing is even officially launched, the more there isn't even that tiny window to enjoy a sense of discovery. I know you played this game a bunch. Like,
Yeah.
Played a lot of Elden Ring right when it came out a couple months ago. And one of the really fun things about that first week, especially with how vast that game was, is like you could go to a wiki and the wiki would be blank because people hadn't figured it out yet. You could, find a cave and be like, I don't know what I'm going to find here, and no, there's nothing that will tell me right now. Of course, over time the meta gets solved, but being able to feel like you have that sense of discovery and exploration is something we'd love to get back to. And just working on encryption technology, working on thinking about how we can test portions of our game without revealing the whole thing for everybody. All that is stuff that I think is in our long-term plans.
That would be awesome. And yeah, I totally agree. It's like whenever there's something new in the game and nobody really knows how it works, I think that a really good example of this on a small scale is the puzzles. Whenever the community is working together to figure out the puzzles, that's like one of the most hype moments for everybody. So I'm really glad to hear that. Next thing I was wondering about is the what do you think is going to happen? Like now Wrath of the Lich King Classic coming out. Obviously, Wrath of the Lich King is going to run its course. Then what?
Oh yeah,
So at this
that's the. I guess they go Classic Plus, to be honest. They theoretically could go Cataclysm, which most people wouldn't care that much about. But then I think people would be interested in doing Mr. Pandora again, honest to God. But I don't think you get much further than that. So Cataclysm is like kind of mere. I don't think people are clamoring for that. I think Mr. Pandora is really the only other expansion back in the past that people would be interested in replaying again. But I think they'll go Classic Plus. Or just stop. It would have to be one or the other, really. I don't think they're going to continue. They can continue. But it's just like, then they're forever sort of like... It would be like me uploading videos from like 200 days ago. On top of the videos I'm uploading today. Like, I'm just going to keep that up for how long? Like, say, for example, I'm still uploading videos in 2 years' time. Like, videos of the day. But then I'm still uploading videos in 2 years' time. 200 days before. Do you see what I mean? Because it's like the old expansions.
Point, I'd love to hear from you, from the community as a whole, what you want to come next. I think we're gonna have, we have a player base that really has made Classic their home. Many people who've carried their characters forward from Classic into Burning Crusade and likely into Wrath beyond that. And when that comes to an end, when you defeat the Lich King, when you kill Halion, the ultimate end boss of Wrath of the Lich King.
Oh yeah.
Can't forget Ruby Sanctum. Come on. Do you want to start over? Do you want to try a different version of that? Do you want to carry that character forward into a new adventure? I know if Cataclysm for many people was like, oh, that's the beginning of the end, and I'm out.
Once the world revamp, yeah.
But I'd ask like an interesting question is maybe like, what is it about Cataclysm that you don't like? Was it the heroic dungeons? Was bad? Is Firelands a bad raid?
Keep the difficulty. I like the difficulty. And then they went and bloody nerfed it. People complained. It's ridiculous. People were like, Cataclysm's too hard. It's like, what the fuck? They got so sort of model I can't think of the word properly. Model coddled, whatever it is, mollycoddled by Wrath of the Lich Kings in terms of how easy Wrath of the Lich King could be in certain places. That when they started getting difficult dungeons again in Cataclysm, people were complaining. It's like, what are you talking about? Just get good.
Highland's a bad zone. Like, is that the problem, or was it? I don't know, LFR and Dungeon Finder from the start and removing group quests from the world or whatever else, or compressing the talent trees. Like, what would it look like?
Definitely remove LFR.
We had Cata content with some changes. Lots of stuff is on the table, but I really welcome that discussion now that the fact that we're doing rap.
I mean, this is the thing. Like, I don't think there should be too many changes with like the old content, but they technically have like one of the really great tools now in modern World of Warcraft for finding groups, for picking groups for specific scenarios, whether you want to do a dungeon or a raid or whatever you want to do a quest. You can literally find people for it and specifically sign up for a very specific thing. Like, you don't need LFR. LFR is just, you could get rid of LFR and then introduce the new dungeon finder from modern World of Warcraft in the old Classic, and I don't think people would mind that too much.
Path is, no longer the world's worst kept secret and actually something that's known, but we're listening.
Okay, that's great. I had no idea that there was like, yeah, you're just waiting to see what the community wants to hear. And I guess to a certain extent, that's kind of what you were probably doing with Season of Mastery, I'm assuming.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, all right. I know we don't have a lot of time here, so I do want to do one last question. And so at the end of
So
Legion,
short.
so like there's a cinematic, and Sargeras, as you know, stabbed the Earth with a sword,
Oh, the sword. He gets
and
it
it's
in.
been there for quite a while. And I'm not really sure like where are things going with that.
Wait, what? What sword?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. I get it. I see.
What
That's pretty
sword?
much exactly what I would expect. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. I really appreciate you coming on today. This was amazing. I hope that we can do it
That's
again, by the
brilliant.
way. So
too.
feel
Pleasure
free
chatting. Great
anytime.
questions.
Yeah, feel free anytime to come on my stream. If the PR is not going to freak out too much about it, please feel free. Come on my stream and hang out whenever you want.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to Dragonflight. I'll see you later.
Thanks, Zach. Take
See
care.
you. Peace.
There you go. That's a good question. That's a good answer.
Let's see here. Let's see if I got everything good.
What sword?
And I've got to make sure that he said it. I can't believe it. All right. I think that we're good. Linksy, are we good? Let me make sure.
You are great.
Okay,
Thank
I'm good.
you so
Did I
much.
do a good job?
Oh my gosh, that was great. Great questions. You did wonderful. Thank you. I love your segment.
Is she like the PR person for Blizzard? Because when I did the React, well, we watched the Bergera sort of have an interview, I think, with Swolinka. She was also sort of like with Bergera before he went ahead on the interview. So she's like the sort of like the in-between, I think. The, what was the middleman or middle woman in this case?
You're so good.
Yeah, well, you know, it's what you do. It's a professional thing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for setting all this up.
Thank
I
you
really do
so
appreciate
much.
it. Of course.
Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be more than willing to do it again in the future. So just let me know.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
great.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Good luck, stream. Bye, stream.
Thanks. See ya.
There you go. So what do you guys think about all of that? I still want to know what the hell we're actually getting in Dragonflight, but there's still plenty of time. There's no release date for it as far as I know, so I thought those questions were, fair enough, and Ian was a good sport about it. Maybe a bit too much sort of vagueness going on. I think the interesting topic really is like the add-ons and sort of like the damage numbers and stuff like that. How do you fix these fundamental issues that are built into the game because it's so old? That's really the bigger topic, I think, in the long run. So it does open up some interesting perspectives on how to tackle it. Hey, Kidson, thank you very much. 80 months. He's managed to make the 80 months. 80 years old. Finch from Harry Potter. I didn't watch Harry Potter. Well, I think I saw some of the movies, but not really religiously or anything, because I was just a bit too old. That's Finch. Are you sure that looks like Asmongold? If I look up... Oh, Filch. I'm looking up Finch Harry Potter. You got Filch here. You already know about this, right? About what? Oh, the mobile game thing. Is that what this is going to be? Join us for the reveal of a new mobile game set in the Warcraft universe. Yeah, we'll obviously take a look at this when the time comes. It's wouldn't it just be, it wasn't Pokemon Go or something like that, basically, but for World of Warcraft? I remember ages ago there was a BlizzCon, must have been like maybe the Warlords of Draenor one, or potentially before it, where I'm not even sure the guy works at Blizzard anymore because he was in the picture of the Cosby suit, the Cosby suite. But the guy was in charge of like pet battles and stuff like that, and I think he always sort of spoke about sort of wanting to do more with it. I remember that in a BlizzCon panel, vaguely, because it was years ago, and I don't have the exact words that were spoken, but I wouldn't be surprised. I don't really play mobile games. I don't play any. What would you guys even want from a mobile game in World of Warcraft?